Hi there, boys and girls. I'm Sleeve, the Retro Boy. Today, I'm going to take you back to yesteryear, to a very special time in my life. A time when video games presented something that no one, and I mean no one, had. A good goddamn story. I'm not just talking about the basic storyline to keep players somewhat invested in a mediocre game about dragons or some shit. I'm talking about the story being the driving force of the game. The gameplay was literally secondary. Well, there was only one studio consistently willing to put this idea into motion. One bold studio with an ever bolder name behind it. I'm talking about LucasArts. There was one other studio that was willing to put out these Zork-like titles, and that was Sierra. They had the ability to make fun little adventure games, but LucasArts had the IP on its side to make hits happen in the story-driven adventure genre. They could make story-driven games with gameplay interfaces that revolved around solving puzzles, and they would convince people to invest in these games that neither had platform dynamics nor guns to sell their playability. They could attach Indiana Jones or friggin' Star Wars. Finally, the adventure genre could evolve. The first title I remember seeing as a small retro boy was a puzzle-based reimagining of my favorite Indiana Jones movie, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Though, to be perfectly fair, I had never beaten it in my childhood. I couldn't figure out the puzzles, and there was no such thing as GameFAQs at the time. But it was followed up by a rather kick-ass game of the same universe, a fresh offering with a new story and an amazing premise. That game? Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. The premise? You, the legendary Dr. Jones, are on a hunt for the mythological kingdom of Atlantis, along with sidekick Sophia Hapgood, who has a mysterious necklace dangling between her cleavage, which she believes is the secret to the mythological kingdom of Atlantis. After leaving her seance gone wrong, you fly around the world, tracing breadcrumb clues from philosopher Plato's ancient diary. This game was an amazing experience in so many ways, from the branching storylines to the intriguing locations you find yourself throughout the journey. But, evidently, this game was only the beginning for a series of adventure games that would come from the same studio. From bizarre sequels like Day of the Tentacle, to extensions of existing universes outside of the Star Wars franchise like Sam & Max Hit the Road. Those two titles in particular were extremely fun adventures for me as a small retro boy. You see, when I was a kid, most video games were relatively clean for mainstream consoles. There was no reason for them to be controversial. They were sprites shooting blocks at alien-shaped blocks. But when I first brought Sam & Max to the class computer so we could play it as a group, it was accidentally one of the greatest moments of my life. The brashness of it all. The brashness!
You never gave me a chance, and for that, you'll fry like a pork sausage.
It's not that I don't like you, it's just that, well, you're too nice a guy, I guess. I think I'd rather go out with someone more unpredictable.
Hello. Looks to me like a marginally volatile hostage situation, Max.
Ooh, does this mean we get to kick some puffy white mad scientist butt?
Can't think of a reason not to.
Ooh! Ow!
Hey, nice one.
Yikes!
Huh?
He's not a real guy, Sam. Can I keep his head for a souvenir?
I could go on. From finding your first assignment inside the stomach of an alley cat, to a character that talks to you in mostly bleeped out obscenities.
You know, you could go blind if you keep staring at things like that.
I'm concentrating.
Man, my teacher was pissed. In any case, I proceeded to beat the adventures of both Sam & Max and Day of the Tentacle, and I have to say, these games showed me compelling and hilarious storylines, the likes of which I had never seen. They were playable cartoons with hilarious solutions to ridiculous problems. In Day of the Tentacle, for example, there's a puzzle where you have to solve the problem of one of your characters being stuck in a tree several hundred years in the future by having another character convince George Washington to chop it down several hundred years in the past. Only to end up winding up in an equivalent of a human dog kennel, because in this world, tentacles have taken over the world. Tentacles, of course, being the result of an experiment gone awry by Dr. Fred in his laboratory in Maniac Mansion. But LucasArts wasn't simply responsible for some of the silliest titles known to man. They created several titles with a somewhat serious tone to them, like Indiana Jones' point-and-click adventures offered. The Dig is a great example of this, a journey into deep space region where all the secrets are deep below the grounds of a giant asteroid. Oh, spoiler, someone falls and dies. There was also a surprisingly compelling biker's classic that went by the title of Full Throttle. Full Throttle had a lot in common with previous LucasArts titles in that it was cartoony and also at times silly, but this is a much more serious offering from the studio, very similar to The Dig, and it featured motorcycles. I mean, who the hell wouldn't love that? This guy does, clearly. But none of those titles, of course, could stack up to the powerhouse IP potential that was contained in Lucasfilm and thus the LucasArts brand. That IP, of course, being Star f***ing Wars. Unlike the more traditional platform-style mechanics of earlier titles, like Super Star Wars, LucasArts for PC and Mac had a unique advantage through the medium that was rapidly becoming popular amongst computer games: CD-ROM. And this tech made titles like Rebel Assault and Rebel Assault 2 possible. They were able to incorporate voice acting and eventually full-blown capture film into the Star Wars gaming universe. Rebel Assault may have had more in common graphically with games like The Dig or Full Throttle, but it's still a great renditioning of the Star Wars universe. Sure, the mechanics are kind of wonky as a result of trying to mix pre-scripted and animation events with the kind of UI that could pass, but that doesn't mean that these experiences were bad. Far from it. They were some of the most immersive Star Wars experiences available at the time. Rebel Assault 2 had a much more realistic look, and at the time, this effect really immersed you in the Star Wars universe. With a full cast of real actors portraying characters against a green screen and sporting full Star Wars garb, it was a truly great effort. There's one scene, for whatever reason, the Millennium Falcon shows up, for whatever reason, and you escape with it through a narrow cave. The mechanics to this part are totally bizarre, requiring you to scroll the mouse in the direction of the arrows on screen to avoid damage. Unless you have the game on hard, then there are no arrows, and you're pretty much left in the dark about what to do exactly. Still, playing from my Mac Pro Tower back in 1995, Jesus Christ, I'm old, really helped immerse you in the experience, and it looked pretty darn good. It was a great effect for me back in the day, back when CompuServe was the only way to get online, back before those pesky AOL CD-ROM packages. So old. You really felt like you were piloting the Millennium Falcon. I mean, how cool is that? And speeder bikes eventually. All different pieces of Star Wars gear, and you felt like you were behind the wheel. It was a true joy. Plus, it was filled with hilarious Easter eggs, as of course is LucasArts' tradition. But many would consider LucasArts' grand masterpiece in the adventure genre to be the one, the only, Grim Fandango. Grim Fandango was a very hilarious yet serious title that dealt with the underworld in a Spanish Day of the Dead style, which was beautiful to look at and a very immersive world to invest yourself in. Many considered this title to be the height of LucasArts' style, boasting the best voice acting, graphics, and music to date. LucasArts would also go on to inspire several other very famous adventure games, like The Longest Journey, and its sequel eventually, Dreamfall. But for me personally, the best memories I'll ever have with LucasArts predate that of Battlefront or any of the newer Star Wars titles. It always is going to do with the original adventure CD-ROMs that I used to put into my Mac Pro Tower as a kid. And for that, I salute all of those at LucasArts who put their hearts and souls into these amazing titles that changed all of our lives in the mid-90s. Anyways, that's it for this episode of The Retro Boy. Tune in next time as we bring you regular nostalgia bombs and take us back to the great games of yesteryear. Later.